solve large, intractable problems.
It's a new venture altogether.
Your brain is a wild horse there.
Because remember, writing is not a team sport.
You are not selling horse carriages when there are cars.
I want to be known only as the trusted advisor.
More like a tourist.
Play to Potential podcast.
No cricket match can be won in the first 5 overs of the match. Yeah. Similarly, no career can be won in the first 5-10 years of your career. Yeah. And if you examine careers, I have noticed 2 things. The first thing I have noticed is most people succeed in the first half of their careers. Equally, I have noticed very few succeed in the second half of their careers. Yeah. And sometimes I like to say it provocatively, to say even idiots succeed in the first half of their careers. And even good people fail in the second half of their careers. Yeah. So if you want a great career, you got to solve the problem of how am I going to be successful when I get to the second half. That's the key problem to be solved. Every other problem will solve itself. And the answer to that problem is in the first half. The first half is the catalyst for the second.
Welcome to the 28th conversation at the Play to Potential podcast, a series of reflective conversations with accomplished individuals across various fields on 3 broad themes: leadership, transitions, and careers. Some of the past guests include Nandan Nilekani, Zia Modi, Pramad Sinha, Vinita Bali, Rama Bijapurkar, Vishi Anand, Avnish Bajaj, Atul Kasbekar, and the like. I'm your host Deepak Jayaraman. I'm an executive coach and I work with leaders and organizations and help them play to their potential by engaging with them during periods of high-stakes transition, whether it's personal or organizational. You could visit transitioninsight.com for more details. My guest this time is Chandramouli Venkatesan, also known as Mouli, who recently authored the book Catalyst, a bestseller published by Penguin RandomHouse. Mouli till recently was the managing director for Mondelez in India. The book is an insightful take on how individuals should shape their career, make thoughtful choices along the way, and take ownership of their own development in the journey. At some level, this podcast is about the 2 questions people ask in their journey: where to go and how to grow, and Mouli addresses both the questions with remarkable clarity and depth. Mouli divides up a career into 2 halves and talks about how people should approach the first half so that they can set themselves up for success in the second. It's been about 20 years since I graduated from IMA, and I find myself and a lot of my peer group at around the half-time mark between these 2 phases, and I found some of his insights fascinating given my journey and the context. What I really liked about the book and the conversation was that Mouli was able to take a conceptual idea and provide tactical suggestions for how people could bake those ideas into their lives. At the outset, I should mention that if you want to listen to the conversation offline, say during an airplane ride or during a gym session or another time, you could access it at iTunes, Stitcher, Savan, or any of the other podcast apps that are out there. Without further ado, over to my conversation with Mouli. Mouli, thank you so much for your time. Excited to be talking to you.
Pleasure, absolutely.
And congrats on the early successes of the book Catalyst. Looks like it's sort of doing very well and there's a good reception for the book.
As of now, it's a strong start. As I say, well begun is half done.
Yeah.
So we are number 1 in management books in Amazon for a reasonable period of time. And by publishing standards, it's a bestseller already. So I'm kind of pleased. But at the same time, my vision of the book is that it's a perennial book. It's not a up and down kind of book. So there is still room to improve.
Got it. Maybe a good place to start, Mouli, is talk to the listeners about why you decided to write the book.
So the story to the book has been an interesting story in itself. Firstly, connecting dots backwards, bulk of my 25 years has been business and P&L roles. But there was a 3-year period where I did a cross-functional stint as the head of HR for Cadbury India. And all of us as business leaders, we have intuitive sense of what makes people succeed. But my 3 years in HR also allowed me to put principles to that intuitive sense, And I think one of the ways I defined the HR job for myself was how do I get people to succeed? Yeah, it was a very simple phrase. And then around few years after that, maybe 13, 14, I was in an Asia Pacific role. And I did the Asia Pacific role out of Mumbai rather than Singapore because of personal considerations. So I used to end up in Singapore Airlines 4 times a month. I must have taken 60 flights, 80 flights in a period of 2 years. And I mean, there's only so many movies you can see if you fly so often. So I decided that I must be productive in the flight. And I just started writing answer to the question, what makes people successful? How do you succeed? And maybe over 40, 50 flights, I felt I had enough material. And I said, if this sounds interesting enough, let me convert it to a training program. And I created a training program called Tee Off with Mouli, which comes out of my golfing passion, but it's got nothing to do with golf. It's all about success. And then I was doing this program for whoever was interested. So I covered about 35, 40 sessions as of now, about 22 companies. And just helping people succeed. And as I was doing this program, the feedback was overwhelming continuously to say, this is life-changing, this is helping me, you must try and write a book, this can't be constrained by your time, so it must have an audience beyond your time. So that feedback was continuously there. And then the trigger just happened where I decided to take a brief sabbatical between 2 jobs. And I said, if I don't get it done now, I'll never get it done. So that's the way it went.
And on that note, Mouli, even the desire to take a sabbatical. I've often seen people try to back their life. What was behind the need to take a sabbatical or the desire to take a sabbatical?
I think you basically reach points in your career where you say that you need to just pause a little bit, have a think on what motivates you, what drives you. And I think I reached that phase. Where I said I need to give myself just a little bit of time with myself without trying to prove something every day.
Got it. And one of the things I found interesting in the book is you talk about ROI and you speak about evaluating different modes of ROI and then eventually deciding to write the book as you felt it was the right or the optimum ROI. Talk to us a little bit about how you thought about ROI and how you ended up with book as a means of maximizing ROI.
So the context of this was the ROI for social impact. To say each one of us tries to do some kind of social impact. Bulk of us give money, right? Some of us also give time. And I think the question I asked myself was, if I'm willing to go beyond money and give some time, what's the best ROI to that time? And a lot of us, the moment we think social impact, we think, how do I go and teach maths to underprivileged children? Or how do I go and, clean up some dirty place? Or how do I do some volunteering? And all that is valuable. But those are not using your skills. You are just another person. Anybody can do that and you can do that. I think for people like us who have also built skills, if we can find a way of having social impact which also leverages our skills, then the social impact is going to be multiplied. And I think that's the mindset I brought and said, my skills is in helping people succeed. And hence the best way I can create social impact is to create more successful people in this country. As opposed to, cleaning up a dirty place. And I think that's the approach I took. And then I took all mediums available for that. It's a session, it's a show like this, it's a book. All mediums available.
Now, I just want to dive into the book, if you're okay. And one of the things that really struck me and endured after I finished the book was the TMRR. You call it an algorithm, which I found interesting. Target, measure, review, reflect. Expand on this a little bit for us.
Yeah. Now, I think let's go to the very context of why that's important, which is to succeed. I think one of the most important things is to build the right experience. And what I found was the very notion and understanding of the concept of experience is poor. For all of us, we think experience is equal to time. So we say, I have 10 years experience of something. Time is the input. Experience is the output. The output cannot be equal to the input. Yeah. So if you have put in 10 years, somebody can end up with 5 years experience out of it and somebody can end up with 15 years experience out of it. And what I found was the difference between successful people and less successful people was their ability to convert time to experience. Successful people seem to have a higher conversion of time to experience. They got more experience out of the time they put in. And less successful people also put in the same hard work and the same time, but they don't seem to get the same experience out of the time they put in. Yeah. So that's the context to the game. And hence I was trying to answer the question, what is it that successful people do to convert the time to experience? What's the model? Yeah. And that's where I came to the TMRR construct, which is target, measure, review and reflect. And if I can give you a bit of a story in that one, which is an activity we put a lot of time, which is walking. And I mean, we've all been walking for many years. But we don't think walking is an experience for us. And the reason I don't think walking is an experience is because my walking today is not better than what it was 5 years back. Yeah. But I put in a lot of time, but I do nothing to convert that time to experience. But if you take an athlete in the Olympics who is participating in a 50-kilometer walking race, yeah, the same walking is converted to experience by that athlete. Right? While walking is not an experience for you and me, it's an experience for that person.
Sort of the notion of deliberate practice, as they say.
Absolutely. And hence I asked, what is that person does? What that person does is TMR, which is for walking the person as a target. To say, I want to do 50 kilometers in 3 hours 36 minutes. As a measure, to say I did it in actuals in 3 hours 40. And then as a review, which is I had an uphill section, downhill section, flat section. I possibly didn't do an uphill well, which means I have to strengthen my hamstrings. And has a process of improving walking and converting walking into an experience. So that was, I think, the insight around which I built TMR. And then I realized that a lot of people in the corporate world have this assumption that TMR is something which happens by itself, because companies anyhow make you do TMR through annual appraisal process, goal sheet. So you have a target, you have a measure, you have a review. And people mistakenly assume that TMR process is building experience for them. That TMR process is designed to ensure that you deliver the results that the company requires. So if a boss reviews you, it's often a review for result and task. The purpose of that review is not how do you convert your time to your experience.
It's a great insight. I guess it drives company P&L but does not drive your individual balance sheet.
Exactly. And that's a beautiful way of saying it. And it's a P&L and a balance sheet.
Individual balance sheet and a company P&L.
Company P&L.
Right. And I think that's the disconnect.
And which is where I bought the 4th R, which is reflection. And really saying that for the time that you have put in, if you ask the question, what could I have done better? Then you actually have a very efficient way of converting time to experience.
And to make it tactical, Mouli, when you reflect on your journey and some of the other leaders you might have studied to come up with this insight, any tactical suggestions on how people can make this habit as they go through life?
I think it is really just a focus on habit building. Yeah. A lot of good things in life. I mean, one of the interesting things of habits, they say, is bad habits are easy to build and good habits are difficult to build. Yeah. And a lot of good things in life, we say we want to do, but we don't get around to doing it. Be it exercise, be it reading, be it reflection. So how do we convert it into an habit is the question that I have pushed people. My own reflection habit, for example, I've tried to make it a habit to say every day in the evening when I go back home from office, sitting in the car, the first 15 minutes I ask the question, what could I have done better? So now I have a very anchored habit of saying the moment I get into the car, I reflect. Yeah. And it's an automatic process and it happens for every nature of activity I have done. Yeah. And I'll give you a very interesting anecdote. Very early on in my career, right in the first year, in fact, I joined as a management trainee in Asian Paints, but there was the exigency and the godown was suddenly unmanned. So they put me into the godown saying, I mean, the business has to run. We'll figure out the fact that you are a fancy MBA later, but right now you're going to run the godown. Yeah. So I ended up running the godown for 3-4 months. a lot of people would think, oh, I'm wasting my time, I'm doing a manual job of counting boxes and reconciling boxes with what's in the paper and so on and so forth. Now, if you want a mindset of saying, I want to convert that time to experience, which is valuable, with the same godown standing there, you can either just do the mechanical activity of reconciling boxes with paper, ensuring goods come in, goods go out, or you can also learn about the business. And I learned many things about the business standing there. First thing I learned was how order patterns happen, right? When do orders come? Which kind of retailers order when? City retailers, how is their order pattern different from upcountry retailers? How is month-end orders different from month beginning orders? Which SKUs get ordered in full boxes? Which SKUs get ordered in half boxes? Yeah. So it was almost like an analytical process for me if I chose to look at that data that way. Yeah. And hence, for example, in hindsight, when I got into marketing, then I knew how to design boxes, and I knew sitting there in the godown that most people who have designed the boxes have never sat in a godown. And it was very, very inefficient to manage those boxes in the godown. Yeah. So I think it's just the mindset you bring to say, I can take any activity and convert it to a valuable experience. If I think of it in that way. If I think of it as a manual activity, I can execute it as a manual activity. If I think of it as an analytical activity with a lot of data from which I can get insights, I can execute it that way.
And to ask a question differently, wearing my search consulting hat when I was at Exams, how do you decode experience from time? Often when people, let's say, submit CVs, they talk about time spent. If you were a recruiter, how do you distill experience and not just time?
Yeah, you can see my broad smile. I think it's one of the greatest insights in my life, and I changed how I hire about 6-7 years back once I myself crystallized this insight for me. And I realized that bulk of us in interview are asking what people have done. They're saying, what have you done? Explain what you have done. That is of no use to me. The purpose of experience is, if I look at two candidates, a 15-year candidate, a 10-year candidate, my implicit assumption is that if in my business, in a situation in the future, the response of the 15-year person has to be better than the response of the 10-year person. And hence, what is of value to me is not what the person has done, but how, using what they have done, they're going to respond to situations in my business. And hence, I changed my interviewing to reading CVs and saying, if this is what you have done, then these are the situations you should be good at. And I would form those situations, and in the interviews I would give those situations and say, now give me your response. If you have truly done what you have done, you would give me a great response. If you're only parroting what has been done by many others in your company, then you will give me a lousy response. So I changed a lot of my interviewing to saying, give me response to situations.
Moving forward, Mouli, the other piece that struck my attention was you talk about raising the game where it matters. Something that we associate with people like Roger Federer or Dhoni hitting that 6 in the World Cup. And you mentioned that in the context of a learning cycle. I'd love to know what you have in mind and if you can expand on this for the listeners.
Yeah. So I think my observations of building experience was that part of the experience was also driven by which learning cycles you participate in. So for example, if there is a very big new product being launched and you have been involved in that learning cycle from day one right till the launch, you end up with a certain kind of experience. Or if there is an organizational transformation and you have been involved in conceptualizing it all the way to execution. So I call that a learning cycle, yeah, which is end to end. You're involved from the beginning to an end. What I found was that successful people seem to have participated in what I call as major learning cycles. Yeah, there are minor learning cycles and major learning cycles. So successful people firstly seem to have participated in major learning cycles, which has had a transformational impact on their development and their experience building process.
And how do you distinguish the two, major versus minor?
I think it is quite simply to say that if you were to say in each learning cycle, there's a certain learning potential. Yeah. And all learning cycles don't have the same potential. So the bigger the potential for learning, the more major the learning cycle is. It's, I think, the simple way of looking at it. What the other thing I notice successful people do is they somehow seem to kick the gear when they get to a major learning cycle. They know that this is a major learning cycle and I must be in better form here. It is like saying ki yaar, if you are a Dhoni, then you somehow realize that the World Cup final is when you have to be at your best. Yeah, it's a major event. And I think similarly in careers, the successful people somehow seem to lift themselves one gear in major learning cycles. Yeah, and I think that's a skill that we can all cultivate. To say that the moment I recognize I'm in a major learning cycle, how do I lift myself a gear? And it does two things. One is a major learning cycle is a major learning opportunity for you, right? And hence if you lift yourself and operate at a higher level, you end up learning a lot more, which builds your experience. But the second thing, the major learning cycle is also important to the company. And if you lift yourself a gear in that important event, then your contribution is significant and it has a very positive benefit on your careers in the future.
And also much greater visibility and
absolutely
related things. Got it. The other piece which personally struck me was this notion of laying the foundation for the second half of your career in the first half. And I say specifically in my context is as I look at my peers who graduated with me from, let's say, an IMA, a lot of them are sort of at that interesting inflection point where they're close to 20 years of experience and one can see the different momentums with which people are moving into the second stage. Talk to us a little bit about, what you mean here. What's the foundation people can lay in the first half that helps them in the second half?
No, in the book Catalyst, one of my strong beliefs is that the first half is the catalyst for the second half. Yeah, and I think that's the way I like to frame it. But it's actually useful to start with a story, the hare and the tortoise story, as we have all heard, which is a race between the hare and the tortoise, which the tortoise wins because the hare kind of becomes lazy. And the moral of the story is slow and steady wins the race. So sometimes as I do these sessions, I ask people, do you like slow and steady wins the race as a moral for careers? And typically the young people don't like it. They don't like slow, in anything. And I also don't advocate people being the tortoise in their careers. But I certainly advocate and say, don't try and be the rabbit in your career. No cricket match can be won in the first 5 overs of the match. Yeah. Similarly, no career can be won in the first 5-10 years of your career. Yeah. And if you examine careers, I have noticed two things. The first thing I have noticed is most people succeed in the first half of their careers. Equally, I have noticed very few succeed in the second half of their careers. Yeah. And sometimes I like to say it provocatively, to say even idiots succeed in the first half of their careers. And even good people fail in the second half of their careers. Yeah. So if you want a great career, you got to solve the problem of how am I going to be successful when I get to the second half. That's the key problem to be solved. Every other problem will solve itself. And the answer to that problem is in the first half. The first half is the catalyst for the second. There are two things you can manage your first half for. You can have an outcome in the first half of saying, I want to be successful in my first half. Or you can have your outcome in a first half where you say, I want to use my first half for being successful in the second half. You can have two career objectives for the first half. Yeah. Now, many choices you make, hopefully both the objectives are coinciding. What helps you succeed in the first half, helps you succeed in the second half. Those are the easy choices to make. But there will be times when you have to make choices where what makes you feel successful in the first half is not going to help you in the second half.
There's a trade-off.
The trade-off. And that is where my strong advocacy is always make the trade-off in favor of what will help you in the second half.
Give us an example. What do you have in mind? What are the kind of choices what are the mistakes people end up making here?
Yeah, exactly. So, for example, one of the mistakes that people make is length of roles, right? Now, typically they want to get to the next role in 18 months in the first half. Yeah, they don't want to put in 2.5-3 years in the current role. Because the next role is a promotion or is possibly a slight salary increase and so on and so forth. Now, how does this impact when you get to the second half? In the first half, what tends to happen is a lot of your success is by conquering low-hanging fruit. So, typically in the first year of any job, 18 months of any job, there is enough low-hanging fruit in any role. And if you solve the low hanging fruit, you have a degree of success, you look good, and on the basis of that, you can get a promotion, you can get a job, so on and so forth. Yeah. When you come to the second half, the job of leaders in the second half is to solve for high hanging fruit. It is the juniors who solve for low hanging fruit. You don't get to senior and again solve for low hanging fruit. But if in your first half, you have never given yourself the time to solve high hanging fruit, then you have never built the skill of solving high hanging fruit. So you end up being very successful in your first half by solving many low hanging fruits. One fine day you come to the second half where what you need to succeed is solving high hanging fruit, and you have never built that capability. Now to have built that capability, you needed to have some patience in the first half where you say, I give myself 3 years, where in the first year I solve low hanging fruit, and then the second and third year I solve for the more complex high hanging fruit. Yeah. Now that skill building is a contradiction with my need for a promotion every 18 months. Right. So that's the example.
Got it. And I guess it goes back to the point about learning cycles. I guess the cycle needs to be long enough for you to get to the high hanging fruit. In any role, I guess early you start off with the easy wins.
Easy wins, exactly.
So it sort of ties back to the point about lengthening the learning cycle.
Exactly.
You also talk about selecting mentors carefully. And I really liked the point about the sort of the duration or the perspective of the mentor compared to yours. Yeah. And that insight was helpful. Talk to us a little bit about how you think people should pick mentors as they go through the journey.
Yeah. Firstly, mentors are hyper crucial in today's careers because I think careers are non-linear. It's quite unpredictable, and hence there are many choices which you don't know how to make well. And you need somebody's help to make career choices well. Nobody is there today who can make their own career choices perfectly. So you need mentors. The question then comes to say, how do you choose a mentor? And I think I have 2 or 3 principles on that. First and foremost, a mentor is different from a career counselor. And the key difference is the mentor has a personal interest in you succeeding. A career counselor, I can counsel 1,000 people today. If they come to me and say, give me advice, I'll give. But I'm giving it from neutral principles. I don't know them. I don't have a stake in their success. Yeah. But a mentor must have a stake in your success. So that's, I think, one of the important principles for me. Hence, they know you and they care for you. The second thing is a mentor must be able to provide a view which is different from your view. So often we make career choices talking to our peers, our friends. The thing is, all of us have the same view because we are at a rough similar stage of their career. So we look at the same direction. It is like you are on a road, you are on the 20th kilometer, you are looking at the 30th kilometer. All of you are at the 20th kilometer. Yeah. A mentor must have a different view to your career. The mentor is at the 30th kilometer looking back and saying, this is how the journey looks looking back. So mentor must be somebody who can give you a different view and hence must be at a stage of career and a position which is a view different from yours. And the third principle I like in choosing mentors is no conflict of interest. A mentor must give advice based on only what is good for you. And they have no conflict of interest in either managing their own requirements or the requirements of the organization. They have only one criteria, which is what is good for you. Yeah, I think this is how you construct a mentor, and which is why it's so difficult to find mentors.
In terms of mentors, how have you thought about mentors? Has it been 1 or 2 people, or has it been a pool of people that you consult at key moments in time?
Yeah. No, I think it is difficult to have many mentors. There would of course be many people you consult. But I think the difference between consulting and mentoring is in consulting, you take the opinion and then you make the choice. In mentoring, sometimes you must be willing to even go by the mentor's choice if it is different from yours. So hence it must be people you deeply trust. Yeah, and I have sometimes gone by mentor's choices which are different from mine. So it has been a few key people where I have built that degree of trust, where I have the confidence that they will only suggest it for my good.
That's a very interesting point to make, because some of the suggestions might be in the realm of what you haven't seen yet. Yes. Back to the paradigm of where you are in the race or where you are on the road. Yeah. They probably have seen some elements of the road that you haven't seen yet. Yeah. So to that extent, they might have a slightly wiser point of view. That's a very interesting insight. This is your host Deepak Jayaraman here. What I really liked in this segment was the point Mouli makes about careers becoming non-linear and there being several more forks on the road today than they were 20 years back. I believe the two big questions we need to navigate as we go through our careers are where to go and how to grow. People often think about mentors in the context of personal growth. While that's true, like Mouli says, I believe they can add significant value when we have a fork in the road and we are solving for where to go. Very often people get lucky and get eye-opening insights on themselves in the most unexpected of places. One of my earlier guests, Anu Madgaonkar, who is now a partner at the McKinsey Global Institute, but who started her career in banking, talks about an interview with a senior partner in McKinsey who got her thinking about what sort of an environment she'd flourish in.
I go back actually to a moment of epiphany that I had in a very unexpected place, which was when I was being interviewed by one of the most senior partners in McKinsey 15 years ago or more, when I was applying to join the firm. And I had had a series of interviews which went fine, and then this very, very senior partner was sitting there, and he said, asked me a little bit about my career goals or something like that. And I started telling him about how I enjoyed every aspect of my professional journey so far, except this one particular phase. And he stopped me dead in my tracks, and he just, in a very penetrating way, he said, "Why did you not enjoy that phase?" And sitting in that interview, actually, I went through a moment of complete self-awareness. I was not aware of this, but because he asked me that pointed question, I took a couple of minutes to think about it, and then I came back and I said, as I think about everything, I discovered in that phase that I'm not fundamentally a very competitive person. I'm much more a collaborative person. And that situation demanded a level of competitive behavior that I was not very comfortable with.
Building on Mouli's point, it makes sense not to rely on luck, but have a personal board of directors who can be of value during these crucial moments. I guess the benefit of mentors is threefold the way I see it. 1, they have a deep insight into you and what makes you tick. 2, they're truly vested in your success. And 3, they have a view from a vantage point which is very different from yours, and their input, whether right or wrong, will definitely make your decision more robust if you listen to it carefully. Just a quick note on how you could access the content of the podcast. You could download this and listen offline at iTunes, Stitcher, Savan, or any of the other podcast apps. But that may not allow you to navigate across speakers by theme. If you want to do that, you could go to playtopotential.com and navigate through any of the curated playlists that you find of value. If you find the conversation purposeful, do rate and review on iTunes. It will help others discover the podcast and seek value from it. Now, let's get back to the conversation with Mouli. I also like the point you make in the book about decoupling a quitting decision and a joining decision. And again, as a prior search consultant, often we'd play at the intersection of these two decisions. Talk to us a little bit about the nuance here.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I must say that this has been one of my insights from my own life, where I felt that at least one decision I made poorly because I made a quit decision because I got something which looked attractive. Yeah. And I should have never quit that place in the first place. Yeah. And again, in my HR times, I've seen many people quit because they think they've got something better. Right? But they had no reason to quit. Right? And somehow I kept asking, why is this happening? Right? And that's when I realized that people are coupling these two decisions. And the trigger to quit was actually coming in the form of an opportunity. Right? And I said that's where a lot of mistakes happen. And that's where people kind of go wrong in their careers. And hence the recommendation I have is decouple these two decisions. You must first know whether you have a reason to quit. And the reason to quit cannot be that I found something else. Because that journey is a never-ending journey. There also you will find something else and you will find something else. So you must know, do you have a reason to quit? And the way I like to think about the reasons to quit is, I think there are only two reasons you should quit. One is either your learning is tapering off and you're stagnating in your learning, or you are experiencing an issue of fit. which could be culture or values or chemistry or whatever it is. Yeah. These are the only 2 reasons you should quit. Everything else, promotion, salary, career, all that is secondary. Because if you're driving learning, all that follows. Yeah. So you must first find out if you genuinely have a reason to quit, which is learning and fit. Once you conclude there is a reason to quit, then you can figure out all the join opportunities. But if you start the other way around and you end up saying, oh, I have got an opportunity, but I don't have a reason to quit, then you end up making mistakes.
Let me dig into this a little bit. As a search consultant, clients would often say, don't give us candidates who are job seekers. Give us candidates who are doing well, but want a bigger canvas. So probably there is if we persist with this, assume you're doing well in your role. But often there are opportunities which are bigger, and maybe it's just a timing that it's a bigger canvas or a better culture or whatever. So how, in those situations, it's not to say that you're dissatisfied at the current place, but there's an opportunity for a bigger play. So how do you distinguish that kind of a situation from what you just outlined, which is leaving for the wrong reasons?
Yeah. And I think my answer to that question is you get to that bigger play, and then you get another bigger play after that, and then another bigger play after that. Are you going to say yes to each bigger play that comes your way? Yeah. I think we all celebrate the successes that a few people seem to have got by getting to bigger plays. For every one success, I have seen 3 failures, where people have gone to what on paper looks bigger, but their career hasn't necessarily moved in the right direction after that. And they would have been actually better off if they had stayed. Yeah. So I think the question is again, what drives careers? Is it position or is it your capability? The key mindset I bring is to say what drives career is your capability. And if you are in a place where your learning is very rapid, your career is a given. Even if you say no to something which looks attractive right now, your career is a given because your learning is growing at such a pace. And this is a marketplace that takes care of people who learn. It's a very simple mindset.
It's a great insight. And again, for somebody who's in that maze, going through that career, how do you objectively determine if you're going through a learning cycle? Sometimes, learning happens and you don't realize till you step away from it. Yeah. Is there an insight into people recognizing the pace of learning or the quantum of learning that they're going through?
Yeah. I think I would possibly give an analogy of sports, to say sometimes, a player is in a zone, and is kind of effortlessly doing stuff and is also enjoying themselves. I would think your learning would be very high when you're in a zone in whatever you're doing at work. And if you're feeling that way, you're possibly in a fantastic learning cycle. Yeah. And I wouldn't give that up for anything.
And in the book, Mouli, you talk about the specific transition from Asian Paints to GE Countrywide. And you talk about that's a transition that you shouldn't have made. So why do you say that, and what's the thinking behind that conclusion?
Yeah. And that mistake I made was actually the inspiration for me to write the chapter on quit and join. To say how does one segregate the decision to quit and the decision to join. And I made the decision to quit from Asian Paints without having sound reasons to quit. I made the decision to quit because I thought something else was more attractive. Yeah. And then I realized that I was actually in a major learning cycle in Asian Paints. I was in an absolute zone. I was contributing effortlessly. I was learning. I was getting to do new stuff. But I gave all that up because I thought something else was more attractive. Yeah. And I think knowing when you are in a learning zone, knowing where you have a company where you have a high fit. Yeah. And these are important parameters in managing your career. And that was, I think, the mistake I made, and inspired me to write the chapter.
And actually, the related question there is, I guess, there is a structural asymmetry to evaluating a new opportunity. You clearly know a lot more about where you are than where you possibly headed. So what's the takeaway in terms of how you evaluate a new opportunity, both from a fit standpoint and a potential learning cycle standpoint? What's your take on that?
And and in my HR days, I used to try and mentor a lot of people, because you end up talking to a lot of people who are trying to quit and trying to explain to them, why it's not a good decision. And obviously in these things, you have to get them to the right decision. There's nothing you can do. So I formed a 2x2 matrix. And I said, one is what's good about where you are and what can be better. And equally, what's good about where you're going to go and what can be better. And what I found that most people, when they make the quit decision, they can see only 2 boxes. They can see what is going to be good where I'm going to go and what is bad about where I am. They are not able to see the other 2 boxes, which is what is good about where I am and what can be bad about where I'm going to go.
Because they see the green grass on the other side and the brown grass
on this side.
Not the other.
And the other way around. And hence, I think one of the important ways of what I used to do was to try and get people to see all the 4 boxes, then make a fair decision. So I think one of the things I encourage people is to make those 4 boxes. And do not under leverage what is good about where you are. And do not assume that there will not be bad stuff where you are going to go. Give those equal weightage and then make a holistic decision.
And moving to your journey, Mouli, how have you thought about success at various points in time? And with the benefit of the journey, how would you think about it if you went back in time?
Yeah. I think that's again a very challenging question. Yeah. And I try to define it in the book at some stage to say what motivates people in their careers. Yeah. And I kind of, through a set of inspiration and my own decoding, I figured out there's a pyramid of motivations. Most of us are motivated at the base of pyramid by the need to achieve. Yeah. Which is, how do I achieve material benefits? How do I achieve a reputation, a designation, a sense of success, so on and so forth. I think the next stage of motivation is what I call mastery, which is how well I do stuff. So as a marketer, it's also important for me to achieve success, but also to say, when I put out a new product or I put out a new piece of advertising, it must look with the Mouli stamp of class and quality, right? And mastery and how well you do stuff. And the last leg of motivation is purpose, which is why do I do stuff? I think typically what tends to happen is you graduate up this pyramid. We tend to start as achievers. At some stage we say just achievement is not enough of a motivation for me. I also want to do stuff well. I want to be a master of what I do. A lot of people don't get to purpose at all, which is why do I do it? Yeah. I also went through the same journey. I started being an achiever, an out and out achiever, very driven kind of an achiever. I think I moved fairly quickly to mastery, to say I don't feel motivated only by saying I achieved something. I must do stuff very well. I must always set new benchmarks and standards of what I do. But I think I passed that phase also fairly quickly, and I was struggling for motivation. And I think somewhere, and everybody has to find their own purpose. I found my purpose in my HR stint, where I suddenly found that the ambition of wanting to help people succeed was a powerful ambition. Yeah. And I think that became suddenly my purpose. To say whatever I do, I create results for the business, but in that process, I must make people better. And that became a purpose. And that then gives me a purpose to anything I do. As simple as a market visit, and I go to a market visit and I meet 4 people of my company in the market visit. I'm not doing the market visit only to, find out what is good and bad in the market. I'm saying in that market visit, I must make those 4 people better as a result of having spent a day with me. And that suddenly gives me more purpose to a market visit, which otherwise after 26 years, you get tired of doing market visits. You do it a little more ceremonially. So I think finding that purpose is actually the final unlock.
This is your host Deepak Jayaraman here again. The point Mouli makes about purpose is a profound one, and it can make a significant difference in how you show up as you become senior. If you're interested, do look up Simon Sinek's TED Talk on the Power of Why. It's possibly one of the most viewed TED Talks. One of my earlier guests was Viren Raskina, who used to play hockey for India and who's now the CEO of Olympic Gold Quest. He spoke about this in the context of what make athletes resilient.
The why is very important for every person. And what does it mean to that person? And I've seen many super talented athletes, but just the why is not very clear to them. They're sort of drifting, and it's not very clear to them what is their dream, why are they doing what they are doing every single day in training. And for me, the why has always been very clear, and that I wanted to win an Olympic medal as a player, and I was shattered when I couldn't win it myself. And now what drives me every single day is to ensure that the same mistakes are not repeated for the next generation of players.
The key is that over time, we all need to find an inner driver that will push us towards achieving great things. And that comes from having clarity on the why question. Just a quick note on how you could access the content of the podcast. You could download it and listen offline at iTunes, Stitcher, Savan, or any of the other places where you normally get your podcast. But that may not allow you to navigate across speakers by theme. If you want to do that, you could go to playtopotential.com and navigate through any of the curated playlists that you find of value. If you find the conversation purposeful, do rate and review on iTunes. It will help others discover the podcast and seek value from it. Now, let's get back to the conversation with Mouli. Mouli, how do you think about the notion of work and life and the interplay between them?
No, I honestly, the context that I mentioned, which is the whole game of work-life, and what I've heard continuously in corporate world is a work-life conversation is a one-way street. The traffic flows from only one way, which is work to life. And the only thing we discuss is what is the impact of work on life. My belief and what I've written in Catalyst is the impact of work on life is lesser than the impact of life on work.
Say more.
Yeah. And fundamentally, let's take an anecdote. There was an anecdote of Albert Einstein, who goes on to say in his biography that he believes that he was a great physicist and a scientist because he played a lot of violin in his life. And he believes that helped him be a great physicist and scientist. It's just an anecdote on what you do in your life. But if you were to bring it down to you and me, to succeed in work, for example, you have to be a good team player. Now imagine somebody who's played a lot of team sports in their life, what we call as life. Yeah. Does it have some bearing on how they will be as a team player at work? Right? Now this doesn't mean you can't be a good team player if you haven't played team sports. But I'm just linking and saying the stuff you do in your life has bearing on your work. And hence the question is, can you design your life? Now all this is happening by accident. Einstein happened to be born in a family who was Western classical passion. His mother started teaching him violin at the age of 4. If he had been born in some other family, maybe he would not have learned violin. Maybe you and me wouldn't have played team sports based on our constructs. Yeah. So this happens by accident. What we do in our life happens by accident. Suppose we were to turn it around and were to say that I want to live my life and design my life in a certain way which enhances my probability of success at work. What would I do? Would I actively play more team sports? Yeah, it not only gives me sports and health and benefit, but it also helps me do something else.
There's a learning cycle which impacts work,
learning
right?
cycle,
To use
yeah.
the language.
Would I actively choose to pursue certain hobbies? And I have a chapter on passionate striving hobbies, as I call it. Passionate and striving being the key qualifiers. And pursuing those hobbies, would it help me at work? Would I actively seek to do some kind of social missions which improves my understanding of human behavior and people and raises my empathy and my listening, which makes me a better leader?
And in your case, maybe just to make this real for the listeners, Mouli, talk to us about maybe some of the choices you made on the life front, which you think has positively impacted the work front.
Yeah. No, I think 2 or 3 aspects of my life has definitely contributed to work. The first is the passionate hobbies. And again, by accident, I ended up running marathons. And in my HR days, I was trying to get people in my company to run marathons, and I said I have to lead from the front. So I said I'll also enroll and run marathons. And then I started playing golf, and both marathons and golf, these are what I call as striving sports. Yeah, there's tremendous striving. You're not kind of running a marathon for pleasure. You're kind of running a marathon to get better. You're fighting against yourself to get better.
There's also a very measurable outcome.
Measurable, and the primary game you're playing is not to beat somebody else, but to say, how do I get better? And I think some of these, it does that. I think often in our careers, we end up in a model where we're saying we're trying to win, which is different from an orientation of how do I get better. In a marathon, you don't try to win. You try to get better. Yeah. Now, once you build that kind of a orientation, let's say in a striving hobby, where you say I'm trying to get better, you bring that orientation into your career, where you say I'm no longer trying to win, which is about beating somebody and being better, but I am going to trying to get better in what I do. So I saw that shift in me tremendously, where I moved from trying to be somebody who was trying to win to saying I must do everything better. I think the other thing of my life which severely impacted me was some of my social pursuits. And again, happened by accident, but I got into it by depth. And I was involved in a few social projects, which was around certain villages where we were trying to develop some communities. And I think there was a suppressed human side in me in the early part of my career, where I was just trying to be an achiever. And I think the social pursuits really brought out the human side in me. And say, there is a world, there are human beings, and the need to be human. And I think it tremendously impacted my leadership. I think I would have been a very poor leader if I had not gone on those social missions.
In what ways, if you could expand on what's the nature of osmosis you see, if I may use a chemical engineering term, from the life to work, specifically on this point around influencing your leadership?
Yeah. I think a few areas. First and foremost, I think the concept of empathy. It's widely spoken, poorly practiced. Yeah. And I think the challenge is partly around individuals, challenge also work context. When you're pushing people for results, it's difficult to be empathetic. Yeah. And often empathy is confused with accepting poor results. Right. I think the empathy is in sitting in that chair and say, how can I help you for results? Yeah. But I think the concept of empathy, I got a lot more. And to say, how do you push for results? I'm not going to lower my push for results. But how can I understand you better to help you push for your results? I think the empathy was something which came from there. I think the second thing which came from some of my social pursuits was the fact that we are human beings. And there is tremendous amoebic, organic quality to human beings. And if you tend to overstructure and overcomplicate, which is often driven by your need to be in control, you don't necessarily get to results. Yeah. And you got to feel more comfortable for the osmotic amoebic process to take place, and hence shifting from controlling and managing to shifting to managing through purpose and through vision, and saying people will find their way of getting there as well. So those are, I think, some impacts the social piece had on me.
This is your host Deepak Jayaraman here again. Just a quick comment here. One of my earlier guests, Meher Padamji, chairperson of Thermax, spoke about her passion for music and why she preferred singing in a choir rather than playing the piano. One of my earlier guests, Meher Padamji, chairperson of Thermax, spoke about her passion for music and why she preferred singing in a choir rather than playing the piano.
I started with the piano when I was 7, and along the way came the choir, and I thoroughly enjoy singing, not individually but in a group. It's a fantastic group, and I love being with people whom I gel with and think alike, or we have this similar interests.
Sure.
And this is one of them. And I find that choir is almost like a meditation.
Interesting.
In some ways, it's taking you away from the humdrum of life. And our conductor is one who has always believed in explaining to us what the words that we're singing mean. And that has made a big difference in terms of if there's a purpose to the way you're singing, to what you're singing, the music sounds enormously better,
Of course.
than if you're just singing the words.
I hear you.
You know? And I think the same thing is for business.
I do think we lead one life, and there's often a significant missed opportunity of integrating the various facets and letting osmosis happen across domains. Now, back to the chat with Mouli.
The other piece you speak about in the book, Mouli, is the notion of lodestar values. And you emphasize humility and pristine honesty. I specifically like the definition you give for pristine honesty as compared to some of the other forms of honesty. So, A, talk to us about what you have in mind when you say use these terms. And second, what's been your experience in cultivating these values over a period of time? And what can we learn?
No, it's a phenomenal piece. So I think in the book Catalyst, I think one of my strong beliefs is that values can be a great catalyst to success. And I think the first thing I'm trying to change in people's mind about values is what has happened is in the corporate world, all of us have seen examples of people being reprimanded for poor values. So we have seen somebody being sacked because they fudged a travel bill, somebody being sacked because they did some form of sexual harassment or conflict of interest, this, that. We have never seen somebody who got a promotion because they were honest for 40 years in a corporate life. Yeah. So the implicit coding that has got into all of us with respect to values is if you screw up on values, you are in trouble. But we haven't internalized the fact that if you raise your values, it can actually be a means to success.
The upside of values is less understood than the downside of
Exactly. So there's a coding in us to say limit the downside. I want to change that coding from limit the downside in the book to leveraging the upside. So that's the first message that I try to give in Catalyst. Once you decide you want to do that, then the question is how to do it. And my belief is the way to do it is to be lodestar in some values. All of us are moderate to above average in many values. But that's everybody. If you want to get the upside of values, there has to be one or two values where you can say, I am the best. I am in a million people, I am the best on simplicity. Right? That's what gives you the breakthrough impact. I mean, I like to refer to Gandhiji as an example. Is a person who I thought became a great leader based on great values. You can discuss whether he was having the best strategy for independence, and I'm sure there are many others who had good strategy for independence. But the independence movement required a leader who could get people to follow, because it was a difficult journey. And that followership he got because he was lodestar on integrity and simplicity. So people were willing to do difficult things, including sacrificing their jobs and their personal lives for the sake of the cause that he was leading. Yeah. So I think getting to lodestar value and saying I'll be the best of integrity, I'll be the best of simplicity, I'll be the best of authenticity, whatever you choose, is breakthrough in its leadership impact. It gets people to follow you. You can take difficult journeys if you're lodestar in values. And specifically then going to the honesty value, which I kind of really feel passionate about, and one of my missions is to try and change that value in society. The interesting thing is in the 50 years of my life, I am yet to meet somebody who by themselves says I am dishonest. So possibly I haven't counted how many people I met, but I'm sure it's in hundreds of thousands.
It's like as a search consultant, you'd never meet a candidate who says don't hire me.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So everybody is honest. And the reason that happens is you get to set your own standard for what is honesty. So it is not an exam where 40 marks is pass and 30 is fail. So if your current standard, your performance of honesty is 60 marks, you say the pass mark is 50. If your current performance is 50, you say pass mark is 40. If your current performance is 40, you say the pass mark is 30. You get to decide what is the standard of honesty. And you always set the standard of honesty lower than your current performance. So everybody is honest. Right? Nobody is dishonest. And the tragedy of our country is every Indian thinks they are honest. But collectively all of us will agree that India is more dishonest as a country than honest. So we are in this paradox that we are in a slightly more dishonest country where every Indian thinks they are honest. You know?
It's like, and I remember an economics experiment where 60% of the class thought they were better than average.
Yeah.
Right? Or 70% thought. So I guess there's a statistical problem. Self-awareness problem there. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I think hence the problem I was dealing with was to say, how do we explain to people that they have to change their standard of what they consider as honesty? And that's where I came up with this 2x2 matrix, which is saying ki, it's very easy. What bulk of us practice is what I call as majority honesty, which is I do right when everybody else is doing right, but I feel very comfortable doing wrong when others are doing wrong. So if everybody is bribing for getting a ration card, then I also don't mind bribing for a ration card. And when I bribe for a ration card, I don't feel I'm dishonest.
It's like the second car that jumps the signal.
Exactly.
Right? That somehow doesn't
Same
feel
thing
the
in a
guilt.
traffic signal. If everybody is bouncing the signal, I also bounce. Now I'm doing wrong. But even in doing wrong, I don't feel I'm dishonest. So that's what I call as majority honesty, which is we are comfortable doing wrong as long as others are also doing wrong. The fact that it is wrong doesn't seem to affect us. The fact that I'm doing wrong doesn't make me think I'm dishonest. Yeah. And I think resetting the standard, what I'm advocating is we cannot be making decisions based on what is acceptable. We have to make decisions based on what I think is right, which is different from what is acceptable. It might be acceptable to bribe for something, but the moment you ask the question, is it right? The answer is different. Yeah. And I define pristine honesty as somebody who says I will do right even when others are doing wrong. It's easy to do right when everybody is doing right. Difficult to do right when others seem to be doing wrong, be it a traffic signal or be it something else. And if you have the courage to do right even when others are doing wrong, that's when you get to lodestar out of honesty.
And as you reflect on your journey and you look at the cohort of people that started out with you post B School, XLRI, and look at the various trajectories, and again applying this sort of a framework, if you will, any themes in terms of choices that people made, just as a watch out now when you look at this sort of journey dispassionately 20, 25, 30 years out? What are some of the watch outs for people as they go through their career, especially around the transition between first half and second half? Yeah. What are the watch outs for them in terms of the choices they make?
No, I think again with my own example, I think very intuitively I did put a criteria of fit very early on, even in my campus job. Yeah. And I knew I have a certain kind of a personality, and if I were to name companies, I knew I wouldn't fit into a Citibank, and nothing wrong about Citibank. It is just that my personality is different from what it takes to succeed there.
And how did you get to that conclusion? What's the data about Citibank you had at that time?
Yeah, that's partly it's sense and partly it's about who are the kind of people who you see go and succeed there. And you said that I am different from that kind of a person.
More correlations.
Yeah, it's more correlations. Yeah. So I think fairly early on, I didn't even apply to some of these companies, even if they were day one. Right? I said, I don't have the style and the personality to go and succeed there. My style is a little more grounded, little more data oriented, less flamboyant. So I think I do advocate to people. I think we tend to, in campuses, make decisions primarily based on glamour and based on rankings. I do advocate a slightly stronger fit element, if you can, right, into campus decision making. That's, I think, one thing I would do. The second thing I would kind of try to change around, which was in hindsight for me also, but again, I think I lucked out with strong mentors and I didn't make those poor choices. But in the first 5-10 years out of college, too much of our assessment of how well our career is going is based on comparing versus others who passed out with us. Yeah. And we saw, we both passed out of the same B school. That guy is in grade 5, I'm in grade 4. That guy has a chummery with air conditioning and I don't have. And too much of our assessment of how well our career goes is based on comparing versus those who have passed out. And I think the hindsight for me and what I've tried to write in the book was evaluate how well your career is going based on how much you are learning. Do not evaluate how well your career is going based on visible markers versus others. If your learning is growing, your earning will grow. I always say manage your career for learning, earning follows. If you manage your career for earning, neither comes. Yeah. So I think I would also say let's change the markers of how we evaluate. And out of B school for 10 years, we tend to be very comparative in our approach.
And based on superficial data.
You go to somebody's house for a party and you say, oh shit, this guy is doing better than me in my career.
And similarly, this is useful insight for somebody who's starting out in their career. Any nuggets for professionals in midlife, let's say 40 plus or minus, again, the careers you've observed, any insights on dealing with sort of the anxieties of midlife? What have you learned?
Somebody was asking me, I wrote a lot in the book on, what are you going to do in the first half? And they said, when are you going to write a book on what did it take to succeed in the second half? And I said, I have to still succeed in my second half to write that book.
But at least to get a good start to the second half.
Yeah, a good start to the second. I think here is, I think to me, the key of the second half, if you're still focused on how do I succeed, I think you start to minimize the chance of your own success. In the second half, if you start to say, how do I get others to succeed? How do I get my company to succeed? How do I get the business to succeed? And how do I leverage all that I have learned to get others to succeed and the company to succeed? I think you start to become a lot more effective and a lot more productive. Yeah. And I think that willingness to subordinate your success for the success of the ecosystem and others is what I think helps you succeed. So it is not a means, it's not social service I am advocating. It is actually a means to you succeeding. Is to understand that in the second half, your success is based on the success of the ecosystem. We succeed as individuals or in small microcosms in the first half. But we succeed in very macro ecosystems in the second half. And if we bring that mindset and say, that's what I'm trying to make work, I think a chance of success goes up.
It's a great insight. Even if I go back to the learning-earning metaphor, if you chase earning, neither comes. It's a little paradoxical here as well. If you chase your success, neither comes. You focus on the other and then this follows as a corollary. That's lovely, Mouli. Again, wrapping up, this podcast is titled Play to Potential. And often I believe the two questions leaders have to grapple with as they go through the journey is where to go and how to grow. And that shows up differently at different points in time. So in summary, what would you like to leave the listeners with for them to play to their potential?
I think the first thing I would leave listeners with is to say that you can grow your potential itself. Your potential is not finite, it is infinite. And if you actually focus on growing your potential, as I like to say, you get what you deserve. Are you focusing on the getting or are you focusing on the deserving? If you focus more and more on deserving more, if you focus on growing your potential, you will be very well off. Yeah, I think that's the first and the important message I would give. And the second is I like the word play because I think we do tend to get a little serious about our careers. And in the process, we neither enjoy the journey nor do we actually achieve the success that we could. Yeah. At the end of the day, no destination is ever final, as all of us have realized in life. And it's a cliche, but you got to enjoy the journey. And I like the play hence, to say let's also enjoy the journey. Maybe we will achieve more, maybe we will achieve less. So be it. Yeah. But if you have enjoyed the journey, you have achieved a lot.
Excellent. On this note, thank you so much for your time, Mouli. A pleasure talking to you and great learning from you.
Thank you. I do hope your listeners get a lot of value from that, and all the best to you.
I hope you found the conversation as purposeful as I did. There were 3 big takeaways for me here. First, I really liked the emphasis on learning at various points in the conversation. Mouli brings it up in the context of TMRR. He talks about participating in large learning cycles. He talks about it in the context of evaluating transition opportunities. The key takeaway for me here is that we are better off building our individual balance sheet over time rather than focusing on income, which is a myopic metric. Second is a distinction between being and doing, and what Mouli says about the impact of life on work. I do think we lead one life, and over time I feel leadership is also about who we are being at home, with our family members, with the community around us, rather than just doing a bunch of things at work. That distinction was also quite interesting and reinforcing for me. Finally, what Mouli says about helping others succeed. This reminds me of research by Wharton professor Adam Grant in the context of his book Give and Take. He divides up the world into givers, takers, and matchers, and goes on to say that people at the top of the pile are often givers, and what distinguishes them is that they give in a strategic way. He calls it otherish, which is a combination of being oriented towards others, but also keeping your priorities in mind. If you're early in your career, you might notice that your momentum in the first half of career doesn't really shift due to the giving. But I've noticed that often the difference shows up in the second half of your career, where a lot more of your success is dependent on the people-related competencies and how much trust the ecosystem around you has in your intent and capabilities. Thank you for listening. My next guest is Rupa Kudva, head of Omidyar Network Advisors in India. We spoke about her initial years in Assam and Meghalaya, her journey to IMA after the admissions process twice, her growth at CRISIL, the transition to Omidyar Network, and more.
The bigger transition was the transition to the chief rating officer. And the chief rating officer is the business leader of the ratings business, which at that time was the largest business in CRISIL. And that transition for the first time put me in charge of what was the most important business of the company at that point in time. But more importantly, it was challenging because I was chosen over my peers to do it, to do the job. And so how do you really move up to that level and then learn to work collaboratively and successfully with peers whom you have considered your equals for many, many years, right? I think so. That was, I think, a big learning for me. And I think in that transition, I learned a few things which were very different.
If you find the content purposeful, please share with those that could find this of value, and do take a moment to rate and review on iTunes. For more content from leaders like Nandan Nilekani, Zia Modi, Vinita Bali, Rama Bijapurkar, Jay Panda, Vishy Anand, Atul Kasbekar, Amish Tripathi, and more, do visit playtopotential.com. You could either access a full conversation there or access content that's curated by themes that might be of interest to you. I look forward to having you at one of the subsequent conversations of the Play to Potential podcast. Bye now.